Hello everyone, and welcome to the MLOps workshop. So in the previous video, we walked through containerizing our application. So now that we have a Docker image and we've built a container off of that image and we've experimented with it, now I want to show you how we can push that image to a place where it's easily accessible via the cloud, and it's not just something running on our local environment. So every cloud provider has their own repository for their own service repository for storing clouds or containers and images. So, but there's a good one called DockerHub. It's free. It's really popular. So let's go ahead and use this. If you haven't signed up for this yet, you should. It's free. And then after you sign up, you'll be navigated to your local dashboard. If you haven't created an account before, you won't have any repositories. So you can click on Create Repository, and you can just give it a name and a description, set it to public or private. I would just keep it to public if you're just experimenting right now. Yeah, and then after that, you'll see a repository located in your dashboard. So here we can see we have some information regarding this repository, and we also have a tags section. So here we can see I have my Flask API image. So how did I get that into DockerHub? How did I push my Docker image into this repository? So if we navigate back to our repositories and we click on this Create Repository again, I don't know if you noticed this before, but we have this Pro Tip section. And this actually gives a quick two-liner explaining how we push something from our local environment up into the DockerHub repository. So we can see we have a git tag and then we have a git push command. So let's go back to the command line. And if we run a Docker images, we'll see I still have our Ubuntu base image and the Flask API image. Now this Flask API image is the one that we want to push up to a repository somewhere. This is the image that has our API and our model baked into it. This is what we would be serving from our production environment. So if we follow along with these instructions here, we can run something called git tag Flask API. So this is the name, the tag on your local environment. And just a bit of a warning here, running Docker, I find running Docker tag can be confusing at times, especially when you're dealing with some of the cloud repositories. The commands, it can almost feel kind of backwards at times. So just be careful with the syntax when you're running Docker tag commands. It's not going to ruin anything, but it can be troublesome to get right sometimes. So here we can see Docker tag local image. So that's this name. And then the new repo and the tag name that I want it to show up in is in the new repo. So if we go back out, we can see here's my repo. Name to be McGivern / MLOps. Great, and then we're tagging it with Flask API, which is why it shows up as Flask API in the repo. So if you go ahead and run this, there we go, that's tagged it. And now that it's tagged, we can run a second command here, docker push to the name of the repo and whatever the tag we gave it. And then after running this, it might take some time depending on how large your image is and what your internet speed is like. We're uploading here, so it can take some time to upload a couple gig sized container image. And yeah, so now once it's up in a repository somewhere, whether it's AWS, Azure, Google, or DockerHub, you can see it's as simple as docker pull running this command right here. So since we set this to public, any cloud provider anywhere that has Docker installed, you can run this docker pull and it will pull in your image, and all you have to do is run the docker run command and our application is up and running. Yeah, so this is a very common flow, build an image and then push to a repository. For a more enterprise solution, we wouldn't be or not even just enterprise, I guess any system, you wouldn't want to be manually building out these images on your local machine and then manually pushing them up. It's time consuming, it's problematic, it's error prone. A lot of times we want to try and automate out as much as humanly possible, because then we eliminate the possibility for human error. And you'll see this webhook panel here. So this is a very common approach to, if you don't know what a webhook is, it's essentially each, like GitHub and Bitbucket, they all have APIs on their service, so that you can choose to notify something every time, for instance, a pull request is approved, or every time a push happens to the master branch. And then when you notify other services that this has happened, you can then have functionality in those services to say, okay, a new push just happened to master, let's do something. And a common workflow would be to have, let's say you're storing all of your API specific logic in that code in a repo, and every time you push to that repo to master, you want to kick off this Docker build process. And what it's going to do is it's going to clone in your repo, run the Docker build, and then run Docker push. And at the end of that, you will have, so you can see there's builds here as well. This is integrating into GitHub and Bitbucket, like I had mentioned, the automated builds. And then after, so that this way all you'd have to do is git push master in a repo, and then in 5-10 minutes automatically your new build image would be up here. And now we could start running git pull on that new version. And so this is a fairly common approach to dealing with Docker images and repositories, and pulling these into a production environment.